Okay. Yes, morning, Tracy. Morning, Cherie. Who else has jumped in there? Julio Barra. It's been a long time, mate. Good morning. Okay. Just while we've got other people joining in, just sorting out some of the pins here. Add pin. Okay. We actually do have a question for you. For people on the line? Question for you. Where are you watching from, and what do you have for breakfast? And you can throw it in the chat. Oh yeah, you've already put something in there, and we'll wait probably another 2 minutes for people to jump in there. What did you have for breakfast this morning, Naomi?
Nothing. I'm doing this fasting thing actually.
Oh,
Got black coffee.
okay. I don't get hangry.
No, I did. I nearly had to have something before this.
Oh, nice. All right, make that bigger. All right. So yeah, get things cracking. Where are you watching from? What do you have for breakfast? I'm the same actually. I'm trying to do this 18-6 fasting thing, and went out. I exercise in the mornings too, so my stomach is just growling away at the moment. But anyway, things we do. Okay, who else has joined us? Let me just look at the attendees. We've got Cherie, good morning. Tracy, good morning. Natasha, good morning. Got a few people on audio, so that you might have been connecting via audio. And good morning, Julio again. Tracy, watching from Foxley Mine in Queensland, and no breakfast yet. Right.
We'll all be a bit starving after
So
this.
you haven't had the piece of toast and coffee or something like that to get you started on the day. Foxley. Well, I'm actually in Mackay for everyone's benefit, so not yet, Tracy. Yeah, nice. So Magella's coming in. Cherie, watching from Brookfield, New South Wales, no breakfast, fasting also my name's Tennille, and I'm filling in for Cherie Hogan. Cherie was called into a last-minute meeting. Okay, well, I'll try my best, Tennille, to remember that it's not Cherie that comments that it's Tennille. I'll probably fail, but I'll try anyway. All right, so no one's had breakfast this morning. Surely someone's had something nice to eat. So good morning. Who else just joined us? Okay, just trying to find where everyone is. Morning, Magella. Okay. And I think that's everyone. Okay. Small.
Hey, Tash.
So watching from Southbank Coffee Count. I'm here, twin. So I'm always called Shree. I do answer to Shree, also her twin. Right. Morning. I'll be listening on my drive to work. Magella. Okay, that's committed.
Oh, Magella, good morning.
Nice. Julio, you haven't put in your breakfast, mate?
WA, see, that's commitment, Magella.
That is. Good job. Okay. How are we doing? Yep. All right. We're 4 minutes in, so we will get moving in the interests of people's time. So much commitment. Good on you, Angela. Yeah, so if you can just mute your audio, but there'll be plenty of time to chat via dialogue. Julio, hi, dialing from Brisbane with toast with honey. All right, we haven't got Vegemite, mate, but we'll forgive that. Okay, so thank you all for coming along. It is early morning. I've got a second webinar later today. Appreciate your time. It's not going to be a waste of time, and we're all here to focus in on this psychosocial risk management thing. And for some of us, we've got different levels of understanding and comprehension, and maybe levels of implementation. And what the whole purpose of today is to really remove some of that mystery, talk about how you can integrate it and how you can do it in a practical way. So a little bit of framing. So if you can, well, someone's driving, but try not to get distracted too much by the awesome stuff that Naomi's going to talk about. Try and turn your phone over, turn off any distractions. We're going to go hard for probably 40 minutes of content and give yourself the best chance to take it all in. And the question that we've got to ask yourself is, think about this person, Joe. He's a health and safety manager at a coal mine. And he's heard of this thing called psychosocial risk management, but he hasn't concerned himself too much about it because he can barely keep up with all his current workload with incident investigations, document reviews, risk assessments, managing team, all that sort of stuff. And there might be some Joes on the line, or you might know of some Joes. And in April last year, the site senior executive or the mine manager called Joe into her office and said, Joe, there's this code of practice being released. It's about this psychosocial risk stuff. I don't know too much, but we need to be compliant. Can you just go out and make that happen and get it done as soon as possible? And how do you think Joe was feeling? Certainly if you're in Joe's shoes, what would you be feeling, thinking, about that? And this particular Joe was thinking, hang on, I don't know anything about it. I'm already overwhelmed. This is just crazy. Where do I even start? How am I going to do this? And the problem that Naomi and I see is that there's many Joes out there. They're overwhelmed, confused, probably don't even know too much about it, but they need to move forwards and get this thing done. And our promise today is we're going to share with you three fundamentals or secrets that if you get them right, will put you well on the way to getting an effective psychosocial risk management process and program. So a little bit about us in less than 30 seconds. I'll speak on Naomi's behalf, but we've been around, 20 plus years now. Each year it's getting more and more. Naomi's specialised in organisation psychology, and my specialty is in critical risk management, so the physical risk management. And what we've seen is the opportunity to bring those two worlds together to create an integrated framework so that if you're going to bring this into your business, you don't need to go off and create a whole new process. There's a way you can actually integrate it with your physical risk management process, if I use that term. So we're going to move fast. We need your help to get it done, and there'll be certainly times for interaction. We'll ask some questions. So what's the style look like? We're going to cover off each of these three secrets. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And obviously, in a 40-minute block, we're not going to get through everything that we could or should, not even a 2-day course. We'll get through it, and we'll talk about what you can do to get more information at the end. And stick around to the end. We'll talk about this, how you get a copy of the slides, this recording, and there's actually a free bonus that Naomi's happy to share with people as well. So the first bit of interaction is, what's the hardest part about getting psychosocial risk management right in your business or in your experience or something in and around that? What are you seeing as a key pain point, key barrier, key blocker in being able to progress forward and get this stuff done? So jump into the chat and share your perspective on that. And what you respond with will certainly help the frame today. And we'll keep an eye on the responses here. I'll just give everyone maybe 30 seconds just to throw something in the chat. All right, Natasha, management understanding the complexity and resourcing needed. And I think you touch on that one, Naomi, don't we, today?
Yeah, that's a big one.
That is huge. Yeah, absolutely. That's a key one. If you don't get that one nailed, then you're not going anywhere. What else? What do other people see as a hard part or a challenge about getting these codes of practice implemented or things done or progressing along these pathways? Anyone else want to share? Tracy, stigma. That's an interesting one. Do you want to riff off that one, Naomi, at all? Anything, something that comes to mind? Stigma.
From the workforce stigma or the overall
I would probably, I'm going to guess on Tracy's behalf, it might be work overall. There we go.
Yeah, there's the whole concept and area.
Julio, work designed to manage psychosocial hazards and the assurance the hazards are being managed effectively. Yes. Cherie, who's really Tennille. I agree with Natasha, and keeping it simple for the company to manage and for employees to think it isn't. Oh, that's a good one.
Mm,
I,
yes, that is very,
oh,
that comes into this initial engagement piece that
yeah.
Natasha brought up. So I'll comment about that. Yeah.
And Magella, the idea of who is responsible. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's
We
right.
haven't. Yeah, sometimes you don't want to be the responsible one because there's so much to do. So it's a bit of a fight on who
That's
to
it.
pass back to.
You guys are all nailed the pain points there. Nice. Okay, so look, we understand some challenges. That's good. We can loop back on those, and we'll move forwards now. Naomi's going to share at least some of these fundamentals. So you want to kick it off, Naomi?
Yeah, sure. And they really, the first one is around this framework piece, really talks to what Natasha and Tennille actually raised there. So, I just want to paint this picture and see if this is you. But you've actually been tasked with this code of practice. You're the health and safety person, or you're the HR person, and the entire lump of that work, as Christian says, comes to you. You actually just imagine you're just not sure even where to start. You've read the code of practice, you've looked at some of their examples, there's lots of free tools to use, but actually knowing what to do next is just making you stalled. So imagine if that's you. If that does sound familiar, and you're doing this on top of everything else, so all those things, if they're sort of sounding familiar to you, then that is kind of our experience in our interactions with the client, and really where Christian and I decided, we need to really get together and help solve this problem. So wouldn't it be nice if we could actually help you not feel like that? Wouldn't it be nice if we actually could, so going in circles, you're not sure of a path forward. Can you just go to the next one, Christian? There is like inaction because you were stuck. Wouldn't it be nice if you actually had real clarity on what the actual psychosocial critical risks were for your business, had support and endorsement from the SLT or your executive, had the resourcing there, and really had started to identify what are the current controls that we already have or need to have to put in place to really manage those risks. That would be ideal, and that would possibly give you a bit of momentum and energy to move forward. So really, to do that, or one of the key steps that we've identified to actually help you deliver on that, is actually to start to actually work within a framework and seek endorsement for that framework. So when we talk about what tends to happen is the story that I painted before, and I've got a great scenario at the moment with a couple of clients. One client has actually really stopped and actually mapped out. The executive said, look, this is something that needs to be done within the business. Go away and tell us how you're going to do it. That's actually came down the line to the safety lead. And the safety lead is actually, instead of starting anything, they've just actually stopped and put together basically a framework. And so we work with them around, okay, what does a project plan look like? Really dovetailing into the framework that we're talking about here. And this is something that Christian and I work together. Most of our clients are in the resource sector, and they're really good at this. They understand and have similar types of frameworks to manage physical risk. So we're trying to look at ways to sort of build that kind of confidence and understanding and leverage on those current systems and processes. So this client basically put together a project plan and a proposal based on this framework. And when they looked at that, they actually also put in place, and in that proposal outlined all the resourcing. And by doing that, how long, how much, the length of time this is going to take, because this is not something that's going to be done in 6 months. This is, a 1 to 3 year journey where you're really going to see the benefits of having this framework in place. And the benefit of that particular client doing that really made the executive stop and go, this isn't just a simple, tack on to your current work. This is actually going to be a big commitment for us. And it allowed them to, what happened from there was basically they then established a working committee, which had some executive representation. There's some reporting requirements now against the timeline and against the progress within the framework that actually go back to that executive level each month to 2 months, just around actually what are the activities, how are we going, what else do we need to do, what are the resources happening. And that is actually, that project, that only started in January last year. And it's really exciting to see the progress. They're actually up to the risk control workshops and starting to look at actually understanding those a little bit more deeply and actually starting to design some effective and alter some of their controls. But it's so exciting because they've got their risk committee involved in this. It's not just the poor lone, safety person driving this project. Contrary to, another client who started before April, and it's been tasked with one person. The executive said, you just need to do this. But really, it's been stalled at that data collection analysis. So running the focus groups, but there's no other support. No one's really interested. They're just asking, well, are we compliant yet? Are we compliant yet? And the poor individual managing that is just drowning. So really the key to actually identifying how you're going to tackle this and actually agreeing on a framework and then getting that endorsed is really key to actually being able to progress and move along. And I think it also talks to that point that like Natasha and Tennille talked about, that lack of understanding, lack of actually understanding of what this is, and it builds that literacy. And again, every time we're even when we've gone through the framework, it's interesting when you present sort of some of the findings or the progress, the potentially your SLT, your executive, don't really understand the subject area and aren't as immersed in it as you have been. So there's actually a lot of literacy in building that knowledge that they actually understand the why and then can obviously respond to your needs. So this is just, so critical and a key step.
Excellent. Naomi's just talked about, if we start to wrap out that little part, to the impacts of not applying a framework and the barriers and the pain point, and two different clients or current clients, one who has and has it endorsed and one who hasn't, and the challenges they're faced with. And also a conceptual framework there, which is aligned loosely to a physical risk management process as well. And so the question which always comes up now is understanding within your business, all the scope of work that you do, what impact would it make to the success of these psychosocial risk management programs if there was a framework available, the framework was endorsed, and then the works were underway in accordance with that framework. And if it would make a difference, then the opportunity is to actually proceed forward and do the work to put the framework in place and get it endorsed. And so we can see that, to round that out, that is one of the key pillars right at the start in a successful psychosocial risk management program. Bit of a mouthful there. Next one, Naomi.
Yeah, the second one that we've seen is actually data, all about data. And really what we see happen next is that we go, oh my gosh, I've got to do this. And we jump into data collection, and you might use a psychosocial risk identification tool like the People at Work survey, or there's a Guardian, there's a few different options, the HSEC, but those tools are all fabulous. And I'm not saying that at all. What we see sometimes is those tools provide another amount of data and a huge quantum of data. It's actually hard to go, well, what's important, what's not, what fits, what's true. If you just think about the People at Work survey, which is in Queensland, is the sort of free tool available, there's 14 hazards listed in there. And just say in your business, because you can actually section this up, you actually had 8 different departments. So you had the maintenance department, the production department. So you essentially, commercial, contracting groups, and you actually did that overlay of looking at those 14 hazards within each of those different areas. 14 times 8, that you're looking around 112 hazards that you're going to get pop up. And it'll say, these are red, these are moderate, these are green, but they'll still be a huge quantum. And that's where a lot of our clients become stuck, because then it's trying to make sense of that data. So if this sounds familiar, that you're unable to narrow things down, you're just overwhelmed with the volume. You also don't have context to actually the data point. So something might be flagging like low reward recognition, and you think, why is this flagging as a hazard? We have a bonus system, we have performance reviews, we have sort of some informal acknowledgement of, people's efforts. How can that be flagging as a hazard for us? Without the context to actually understand that, you might be going down a rabbit hole that's actually not necessarily that important. Also, the data doesn't necessarily, when people are in that stage, they don't link it to actually some of their internal data they've already got and some existing themes. You might be in a site that's going through an EA negotiation, and there's lots of conflict and lots of tension. So you do see an escalation in complaints, and people are feeling like they don't have management support or supervisor support. So that's coming up red in the, in your survey. However, there's contextual features that are happening within your environment that actually provide more sort of understanding of what's actually happening there. Is this a problem? People just don't complete the survey. So things like the People at Work survey actually are quite long. People don't want to do it. They have a million surveys they're already doing. So you really end up with a small select group. Like I said, you tend to focus on data points that are not necessarily important or are the wrong things. So that's kind of quite a common problem. And that was something when I sort of Christian and I started to talk about. That's why this critical risk management piece was quite interesting, because I thought, this is about really defining critical risk. I'm talking for you, Christian, now, but my understanding is critical risk management is understanding what is the really important stuff that we need to get on top of. And I thought, look, if we can actually understand how that's done in a physical sense, then that would really help us decrease this overwhelming feeling. So wouldn't it be nice to actually have clarity of actually where the problems were? You also would be able to have the context in which the hazard was actually occurring, and really had that clear prioritization so you could start to action resources and further analysis. So one of the things that we'd suggest is actually just starting with the current data that you've got. And so you've got things like, absenteeism data, etc. And one of the tools you can do is actually just write out, have a list of all of those data points. And actually then some of them are owned by different stakeholders. So for example, if you're in the safety realm, the absenteeism records will be held by HR. But actually going and actually seeking from them, what is the difference between their planned and unplanned leave, and what's the frequency? Is that particularly high in certain areas or certain departments or under certain rostering arrangements? Because that can start to help you understand, okay, there's something unusual happening there. If that's happening, and then we're also doing a survey like the People at Work, is there sort of some actual correlation there, some sort of linkages there? We need to dig a little bit deeper. Is this a product of some of these other things not actually being dealt with? EAP data. So if your EAP provider should be giving you data around actually what are the type of work-related referrals. And we typically see 15 to 20% in the resource sector of work-related referrals. Your EAP should be distilling those down. So what's the causal factor? Is it role overload, lack of clarity, bullying, harassment, versus actually just giving you a generic number? Because again, that can help you actually start to look at what are the reasons that people are really going and seeking help. Obviously your workers' compensation data, your turnover and your exit interviews. I love exit interviews because your exit interviews are so rich. People are really going to tell you what they think when they're leaving, aren't they? And similar thing, looking at your physical data. So your musculoskeletal injury, it's the strong link there. What that data collection piece is really important to do is actually understanding that data and unpacking it a little bit further. I was listening to actually another podcast, and they were talking about these data points and really truly understanding workers' comp data. And the presenter was actually talking about their role had been to actually do some diagnostics around understanding the huge increase in bullying harassment that was happening for a client. And when they actually started to explore those particular cases, there wasn't an increase in bullying and harassment within that organisation. They went and looked at all the interviews, the original complaints that people had put in, and really the foundational causal factor was actually basically poor management of employees. So people felt that they weren't heard, they weren't responded to. They were saying to their boss, you know what, I need some help, I'm under-resourced, there's conflict in their team here. And the leader actually didn't respond to those concerns, or the employee felt that they weren't heard. And then that continued, and that escalated to a point where someone went, I have to put in a complaint. That's the only way someone's going to listen to me. So if they hadn't actually done that deep dive into that causal factors in those complaints and just jumped to, we've got an increase in bullying harassment complaints, they would have looked at a totally different control. And the control would have been something around, we need to do some education around respectful workplace behaviour, around, what's appropriate, inappropriate, that kind of thing. Look at our reporting mechanism versus actually looking at, really it's around our supervisor skill level and our capacity for our leaders to actually manage people, which is a very, very different controls. So understand what your data is. Don't just jump and take it at face value.
Nice. So starting around this part out, so we've talked about the impacts of not considering the current data or being overwhelmed by going out and getting additional data sets and some data that's already available that you can interrogate and go into the right level of detail. And Naomi gave an example there of a client who interrogated the data and learned a whole bunch of stuff that they were previously unaware of and could do something about. So really going deep on the data. So again, thinking about your role or what your role is in the psychosocial risk management process or framework or service you provide is, now you know that getting data right, interrogating it right can make a change. Are you going to move forwards now and actually build that into the process? Are you going to look at some of the existing data suites? And certainly don't get overwhelmed and don't spin the wheels.
Sorry,
So,
Trish, I just
yes.
jumped. Sorry, I just jumped. Julio just jumped, but that also ensures that you're starting to look at good quality controls. And Julia raised the issue around work design, and that is also what happens if you actually truly understand the hazard. You'll be more likely to look at those type of controls, which we're not going to talk about today, just in terms of time. But on the call now.
So rounding this out, understanding, exploring your existing data set is one of the key fundamentals. Doesn't cost a lot of money, and it can start straight away. Okay.
Okay, so this kind of builds on this other piece that we just started to talk around, actually understanding your data, and it's understanding, what the hazard actually is. I had just a meeting last week with a client group, and basically we'd done the first diagnostic kind of part, and the business had invested very heavily in the wellbeing space and has lots of really great wellbeing programs. So basically they do some resilience training. They have a lot of access to health and wellbeing services. So, gym membership, a dietitian. So all those things are really good. And the executive just went, I can't believe that hasn't come up when we're running the focus group as potentially controls that we have in place, and hasn't been mentioned as something that actually is reducing our psychosocial risk within this workplace. And if you think about it, we talk about role overload, and we're actually running a focus group and asking the group, what's contributing to that role overload? What are some of the factors or controls that could prevent that happening or mitigate that? They're not going to say, oh, it's because of our resilience program that really helps me. They're going to be saying things like, there's effective change management, or we have a weekly meeting so we actually understand who's doing what, or clear delineation of tasks. So we had that scenario, and this is why, again, that literacy of that executive or the CFO, whoever's holding the budget string, is really important, because there's a disconnect for them around, all this money they've already spent. So if this sounds familiar to you, you've potentially invested in lots of mental health initiatives. The injury rate that you're seeing is still increasing. You're not picking those things up when you're doing some of this exploratory, data analysis. Workers' comp are increasing. Nothing seems to make any impact. Things that you thought you were controlling for are still presenting, especially when you look at the comments in the exit interview. You think, oh, I thought we were on top of that, but it's still popping up in those areas. It can be really disheartening and de-energizing, because there's been a lot of investment. So imagine if you really could understand the causal factors that contributed to the hazard within the workplace, and we're then really able to target those controls and actually map them to that, and actually check whether or not they're effective, and make sure that that's a real commitment from the business, whether or not they're effective. If you could be in that space, it would probably also give some momentum. A little example I just have here talking to this one is like that reward and recognition example I gave you earlier. And this is a real example, and it did flag as a potential problem. So people were saying, there is no recognition, there's no reward for actually the high performers versus the low performers. And when we actually took that data back to the steering group, the steering group and the committee said, well, that is just rubbish. We have, formal performance reviews. We have a cheers program, which essentially is, you call out a peer and, you write a cheers. Interestingly, every department has a number of those they need to do. You need to give 10 cheers to another department. And when you actually sat with the focus group and listened to the causal factor around that, why is this lack of reward? There are these things in place, these controls. They said, look, they're not, those things don't matter. We don't want those things. Back in the olden days, we used to have one award in the business for the year, and there was a big deal. We had a big presentation, and there was probably 5 awards, and that was chosen by a select group of people. But that was really prestigious, and that was a real recognition. If you got one of those, that you're doing a really good job. And the steering group were floored. The HR manager just went, oh, really? We thought we were doing so much better than that. And it's interesting from a psychological perspective. It's kind of like they went to a model of, let's give everyone a reward for participation, like a race, everyone gets an award, but really the kids know who's the first and second and third. And that's kind of what that actually put in place in their workplace. So the control was not doing more of the same as actually modifying what they were doing, going back to something pared back, that actually the workers were telling you, look, you know what, that would be a way that we felt like we were recognized, not these tokenistic things. So imagine if you're really able to understand those aha moments and go, you know what, this is actually going to make a difference. This matters. So and we don't get to go through, we're not going through all of the mechanism, how we get to this place in this, but what we use is actually, we have the data set, the desktop. So looking at what are some of the data points, where are the higher absenteeism, etc. Then we're doing the focus group data, and you might use a tool like the people at work to gather that data. In those focus groups, the rigor that we've put around, that Christian and I have started to do, is actually really starting to identify those areas and really tease out what are the preventative and mitigating controls that the working group are starting to recognise and what the impact is, and starting to rate that impact as well. And then feeding that data into our broad brush risk assessment, and then into the bow ties that we'll sort of front end load and come back and do with the working groups that have been identified as particularly, having a particular problem in that area, or that being a particular hazard. And when we do those bow ties and really flush that out in those smaller groups, in those identified areas, you really start to put rubber on the road and understand where your priorities are. I'm just looking at one of the others. Oh, another one came around this role overload here. The company had a policy around, had a lot of long-term employees, long service leave. So people taking long service leave is quite common. And the policy is that you can't fill a role with a permanent or a contract if someone's on long service leave. But what happens is the role overload happens quite frequently because someone is doing a role coverage for someone who's on long service leave for up to 6 to 12 months, right? Because there's some people who've been there for a long time, they've got a lot of leave in their bank. And what happens is, that here I am and I'm suddenly covering my peer's role. The policy is I'm not allowed to replace that with a permanent. I'm not allowed to get any resourcing because that person's still sitting on the org chart as employed. However, they're not going to be there for 12 months. So how do we prevent people getting into that situation? Because that was kind of just what was done in that business. And some of the preventative controls that we identified were actually basically a trigger process. So they implemented a process whereby if anyone was actually filling or covering a role for more than 4 weeks, that the actual line leader actually had to do a risk assessment on that. And actually that was then documented with their one-up around actually how are we going to ensure that doesn't have an impact? Are we reducing some of the tasks that they're doing? How are we going to set up some monitoring? And that just became actually one of their procedures around role coverage. And it was a great preventative control, but it also allowed them to put in those mitigating controls. So when someone's in that place, it's that ongoing monitoring around their workload. So that was a really great example of that work design and system design response to role overload. Another great one, and this is when you start to look at the quality of controls, was another organisation who had a real concern when we looked at the focus groups and the prioritisation hazard, was aggressive customer conduct. This is a non-mining example. And the aggressive customer conduct, basically people were getting abused when they're serving customers. However, the culture within the business is very much around the customer is always right. And that was really instilled in the employees. And they took great pride in that as well around, we need to make sure the customer's right, they feel satisfied, they stick around and keep using our services. However, it's at the expense of themselves. So what was happening is that the exposure to that type of behavior from a customer was quite ongoing for these employees, particularly the front facing. They'd tolerate the behavior. They actually wouldn't report the behavior. They suffered in silence, essentially. So it was flagged and the business was quite surprised. But the controls to look at that were quite, again, systemic. So they actually implemented a process whereby first of all, an education process around that is not acceptable here. You're just as important as our customers. So they did some internal education with the workforce. That was all endorsed by the CEO, was actually doing, sort of roundtables around this is setting the standard. They then ensured everyone was very clear around actually how that would be, what was okay and what was not okay in the reporting of that. So if you are exposed to a customer, this is what you need to do. This is how to report it. But they also then spent some time educating the customers. So on their call line, they actually had a little blurb that said, our staff don't tolerate, abuse. They actually sent some education material out to the customers around this is the sort of behaviour we expect in our customer group, and our staff are very important. And it's interesting, this is sort of 6 months post that intervention, and listening to the employees talk, they said, it's so nice. We feel so valued now. We feel like they really care. So that was another great example of really truly kind of getting into that bow tie process, understanding what those system type controls were that really are going to make a difference. It's not just, a tokenistic, little program on the side. It's a really system level control and you can see why for that example, it's so important to have the CEO and the executive on board, because those decisions to change those policies, actually invest in that education process with the customer and their employees, and actually put in place those routines, that takes a lot of stakeholders to agree to that, and resources. So it goes back to that point one on why that step one is so important. I think I jumped in and started talking about that one. Christian, I jumped out the slide, sorry.
No, excellent. So look, rounding out that aspect here. So Naomi's mentioned about if we don't understand the hazards and controls, you can waste time. You can put the resources, time, energy, cost into the wrong types of controls and think you're doing well. And we talked about a strategy to help get some granularity to understand those areas. And Naomi gave a few different anecdotes there of some clients who've done the work and have seen the gains by really understanding those hazards and controls. So you need to think about now, what impact would it have on the psychosocial risk management process, programs, whatever you're involved in, if you truly understand the hazards and controls and could have targeted responses based on the causation. So tapping into the workforce's knowledge base on hazards, controls, solutions is one of the foundations to getting this framework right. Okay, so Naomi has mentioned a fair bit of content. So a question to the people on the line, what's at least one aha moment or one learning or one tactical or practical takeaway from the content that Naomi's been going through so far? So we'll give everyone let's say 45 seconds. Doesn't have to be a lot, but this helps to solidify some of the content. What is one thing that stuck out for you as a learning or as a takeaway? Every time I go through this, I learn more and more as well. But we'll encourage you to just throw something in the chat.
Tash is a bit of an expert in this, so I could learn a lot off Tash as well.
Love me a bow tie. Oh, that's music to my ears. Yeah, certainly. That's been one of the opportunities is to, not so much the people in physical risk management going on the journey, but certainly those in the HR space or the health space or things like that, going in that journey to understand a bow tie process and bringing in this content into the bow tie and seeing the gains that you realize by doing that level of analysis. Sheree, the amount of money and energy people and companies can spend with no limited value add. 100%. I think if I what's the training that everyone's doing? Behavioral, is it code of conduct? What's the one that
Oh,
everyone
yeah,
does?
code of conduct. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, something like desired behaviors or something like that. That's just everyone does. Yeah, so much time and effort. Thinking about context plus exposure, considering preventative and mitigating controls. Absolutely, Magella. Mark. Yes, good morning, Mark. No worries jumping on late. Biggest thing supposed to be the value of existing data if you look at it in a different way.
Yeah.
Yes, that's gold. Some really good ones there.
Can I link that question? Just the Tash one around the bow tie. The other thing that the bow tie has been useful in doing is the discussion, but also building that understanding when you're starting to communicate with your stakeholders around your controls and why this is important and why it's not. You know, when you do that and step it out, they kind of go, it helps them build that literacy around this whole area. So anyway, Magella knows quite a lot too in this space.
And Natasha, yes, and also found it links to a process they know, traditional safety. Absolutely. Which is, again, seeing on the same hymn sheet there, that was my biggest concern when I saw this all come out from an working industry that has a risk management framework already, was that the industry would go off and do something completely different for this hazard set, and the codes of practice almost implied, if you weren't careful or instructed, to go off and do something differently. And that's the work that we've been doing, is to show, well, you don't have to do that. You can use your existing framework. Just got to be careful.
Yeah.
Creative super controls. Creative super controls, like a grab and go list, has been favored as it allows for nuances across teams. Yes.
Yes, we've got that.
Nailed it.
Library.
Okay. That's really good. Feel free to keep putting some more things in there. I'll move to the wrap up stage so we can get to questions. So look, there's probably a few different reasons why you've jumped on the line today. You know, it could be like the Joes mentioned at the start. You could be at varying levels on the journey. You could be supporting other clients on the journey as well. But what we do know is seeking endorsement. So establishing a framework, getting endorsement for a framework, you need to get that right and get that done up front to have a successful program. Going through the existing data suite, and as you said, Mark, potentially through a different lens. There's a treasure trove of information already there. You may not necessarily need to go off and go and do more data gathering, and tapping into your knowledge base and what's currently there within the organization to understand hazards and controls and use a structured framework to analyze that also is one of the key foundations. So obviously the question is, how do I do it? You know, moving forward. So you can do it the slow or fast way. Slow way is you learn some stuff, do some stuff, learn, and then repeat, which is pretty much what we've been doing for the last, gosh, almost 2 years on this. And we know that's a slower way of doing it and getting to the outcome. Or a faster way is to learn from people who've done this a bunch of times, or go through this. And I mentioned at the start that we can tell you what you can do if you want more information or more help in this. And Naomi's kindly offering to do a free gap analysis of the organization's psychosocial risk assessment and procedure. If there is a risk assessment, cool. If it's just a procedure, cool. And it's obviously not for everyone. So if your organization's got this nailed, if there's really good knowledge and understanding in this space, then this wouldn't be for you or your organization. The flip side is if your organization is at the other end of the scale, you're starting on the journey, you're like a Joe, just overwhelmed, not sure where to start. We've got some stuff, don't know what it looks like in comparison to what everyone else is doing. This would certainly be an opportunity to take up. And the why, Naomi, I'll throw to you, which lines pretty well.
Yeah. It's really, the value prop, or the reason I moved into this space, and Christian and I are quite aligned, is that, work really has that power to make people well. And it's been such a missed opportunity, I think. And I think we can do better. And I think this code of practice allows us to do that. Jobs should never make us sick. We should never be paid to be made sick. And really, if we get this right, we'll have a big impact on people's well-being. So it's exciting.
Absolutely. Look, and it's pretty easy. Is essentially just emailing your materials through to the admin in Naomi's organisation. They do the work and do that cross-referencing using the audit tools. And then there's a summary call at the end of that where they can go through, look, this is what we found. This is probably what you need to do moving forwards based on, the holistic framework that we're a part of. And look, I wish if I was a Joe and a safety manager, I'd be jumping all over this because it's, you don't need to do the work. There's no cost involved. You're leveraging off all of the framework and Naomi's skills and experience there. And I think the most important one is the low-hanging fruit. Certainly before you make a material investment in certain things, make sure the ship's steering in the right direction is certainly what can happen. So I think Naomi, Lovely's putting the email address into the chat. If you want to take that up, then, just follow that link up and send it through. Thank you, Lovely. Not around forever, obviously, because we're pretty busy. I think all of February is almost shot already, but I'm sure Naomi can find some time in there. Look, and the second one, now it is short notice. I think it's happening 2 weeks. Is we also regularly run risk management masterclasses. I do one on physical safety. That's a different one. This is where that framework that we went through at the start, we pretty much go through that framework in detail end to end, so that we cover off the framework, all the tools, we give the scenarios, there's the case studies, all of that. So what the whole goal there is to upskill the capability of the participants so they can return to their business and effectively build or move forward their existing process. So there's a lot of stuff in it. It's 2 days, and even 2 days, obviously you don't cover everything, but we do get to a point where people can walk away. And also I think it's 12 months, we help people after that as well. So if that's sort of related to your role or people in your business, I encourage you to check that one out. Because as I said, this is probably one of the few programs that we've integrate the psychosocial risk management into the existing one, as opposed to there's a lot of programs out there that pretty much just create a system over here and it doesn't talk at all to the existing processes and can create a bit of a cluster. All right, satisfaction guarantee. Yeah, pretty much. We give people their money back if they don't like it, but that's never happened. Okay, so questions. How are we going on time? Yes, we've still got some time for questions. So there's been a fair bit of content. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to put it into the chat, and we'll happily stay on the line. We'll do some questions and then we'll do some wrap up bit. But if people still have some burning questions after that, then we can still stay on the line. So Carly, you've got to head off. Thank you. That's all right.
Hey, Carly.
Thank you for coming along. Whilst someone might be typing in a question, I'm going to go back up to where people shared some of the pain points.
That is a good one, Tash. Tash has got a good question there,
Good.
Christian, which
Go
has
for it.
been that's been something that's been really useful for us.
Yes.
Yes. And Tash, we didn't put this in this conversation just because of knowledge. You've obviously done a lot of this work. So one of the things that we've done is, and this has been Christian's, real value add, I think, in, the approach that traditionally would have taken is actually a performance risk standard around the control. Is this right? Am I saying, Christian?
Yeah, that comes after it. If we go back, where is it, to the bow tie? Here. So essentially what we've been doing is for each control that you can see listed here, it's that control effectiveness assessment.
Yeah.
So that's what we've been doing. We've been using the same control effectiveness matrix that we do for a physical risk and a control for that, applying the same framework to these. And that certainly becomes very, very interesting where we actually start to see, what's the example? So my EAP isn't going to stop, work overload. No, it's not. It's got no relationship to preventing that whatsoever. So this is again the value of the bow tie. We go and apply the control effectiveness rating to all the controls on their pathways, and then we see, well, what is the health of our suite? And it's more scary than
And to be honest, Tash, what's happened is when we've done that, traditional assessment, like one of our clients, exactly, we've got the list of all the controls, and essentially it's the dashboard was red, wasn't it, Christian? And they're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. However, it really kind of helped us pick out which were opportunities, and then we developed a performance standard around those. So around actually how do we measure and improve potentially some of those controls. I'm just thinking one of the ones we did actually was around that example I gave around the abuse of customers, and that sort of standard. One of the controls was actually the policy and procedure, and it doesn't meet all. It's still down that lower end of the effectiveness, but there are things that we could do to make that better. So we actually implemented as part of that monitoring was, ongoing. How often is that used? Do people know about it? What is the response like? And there was already some discussion on that that had come through. They went, oh, we're not feeding back actually the response on that. So still soft, but yeah, it's.
Magella, a big question. Our organisation is huge, 6,000 employees. Having a PRM for the whole organisation maybe isn't feasible because it's too diverse. Should there be a risk assessment process for each work site? How do we integrate into a cohesive vision here? Excellent. I love that. Because I love it for a number of reasons. One, we're already doing this in the physical hazard and control process. So, for example, if I give you an example, let's think about what are the ones. Let's say a large mining organisation. Let's say Anglo American. One of their key hazards or risks, if you like, which is a good example, fire. So surface fire. So your fire's on surface burning down things, and that wouldn't be great. So that risk is present in pretty much every single operation. And if you're in maintenance, might be a little bit more here versus if you're in production, a little bit more, less there, whatever, but it's everywhere. And so there's a framework that these organizations deploy where in the core, let's say right in the central heart, let's say head office for want of a better term, you do one risk assessment, which is a general one about fire. Okay, what are the different ways you might have a fire across all of our businesses? And what are the general controls that we as a core say, look, it doesn't matter if I'm in Africa or Australia or whatever, we believe that every business can have these controls in place. So that sets the first risk assessment, the first suite of controls, that sets the minimum standard across the whole organisation. Then when you get to the local level, that's where organisations, they can't take out some things, or there's an exception process. Let's say, well, this control doesn't work for us in Africa, but they can then go on top. They can still add some stuff in because we're in Australia, here's some extra contextual stuff. So we're going to add in these extra stuff here, but all of that core foundation stuff's already been sorted. So that's an example of a framework that can be deployed and is currently would be happening now for a physical risk management that could be applied to this. That was a lot of words from me. Hopefully that helps. And I'm happy to keep talking about that onwards. I don't know, Naomi, did you want to?
Yeah, no, and Magella, I know that approach, Magella, you could think about what were the key things, looking at some of your data, where our greatest where our greatest issues coming from, and deploy that across the organisation that you're looking at.
Awesome. That's so helpful. Would you do it for each hazard?
No, was we said no, this is where you and I we went no, we wouldn't do it for every one of those hazards. We'd potentially look at which were the ones that were most likely. So, for example, in mining, we know that bullying and harassment has been an issue. The workers' comp data tells us that. The everyday respect tells us that. So, if you're looking at prioritizing which hazard in mining, you'd go, what, we assume this is probably going to be a problem across all of our businesses because of our data set.
Yes, which, oh gosh, now we're getting right into the weeds, but I'm happy to talk about this because I love this stuff. So there's an idea of an organisation-wide risk assessment, not a bow tie. Let's say, across our organisation, here's our list of 60 biggest things. And on that list could be some psychosocial hazard stuff, could be some physical hazard stuff, there might be some environmental stuff, etc. Within that risk assessment, there's this idea of materiality criteria. So out of this list of 60, what meets our threshold, that is, if we had that thing happen and that consequence was realized, that would be a big deal for our organization. So the same principle can be applied here to these psychosocial risks. Let's say if there's 14 generic ones, I think it's 14, isn't it, Naomi? Apply materiality criteria. So look at your data and then think about, well, what's the consequence and likelihood of these things for our business? And if they go above the materiality, so let's say, I don't know, work overload, sexual harassment, assault, and they might be in your top 3 or top 4, where there might be some other ones. What's a low hanging one, Naomi, that not a lot of people sort of call out and flag as a big deal?
Change management.
Change management. Yeah, that's an example. That mightn't be something. So out of the 14, plus materiality criteria, here's our top 5. Let's choose those ones and do the organization-wide stuff. And these other, I don't know, other ones, here's a less impactful management program around how we're going to deal with that, which might be every site just has a process to make sure they've got change management, and let's just audit change management.
And that are the better words, Magellan. Materiality, that was actually they're the right words around how we drew that line in the sand. That was useful.
Too easy. Oh, you got me all excited now. I can keep talking about this stuff. Does anyone else have a question, comment? And we can, look, Magellan can keep talking after this, mate. Why don't we just move to the wrap up, for conscious of people's time and those that are still here that have made it through, and we can still keep talking afterwards. So questions, look, as I mentioned at the start, you know, if you want to copy the slides, also recording, then lovely, put our email address, the admin at Impress in there, send us an email asking for that. And also Naomi's put together a, what do I call it? It's a tip sheet. A summary, you know, of all of this stuff and moving forwards and everything like that. So just flick us an email and we'll get you that information as well. Okay, I think you know where to find us. You probably already found us anyway. Probably get a follow-up email from us. Any last words, Naomi, from your end?
No, there's a lot of experienced people on this line who have lots of probably good sharing. So send through any suggestions or comments to us as well.
Absolutely. Look, I appreciate it. I'm pretty passionate about this and integrating this. I think someone mentioned right at the start, keep it simple. And if we integrate it, we'll keep it simple. Don't create a new whole shiny object. Yeah, thank you, Cherie. Thank you, Tracy. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Natasha. We'll happily stay on the line now. For those that need to go, thanks for joining us. Have an awesome rest of your Thursday. Have a great one. And we'll stay on the line till the last person goes. So if anyone is staying on, feel free to unmute yourself if you want. We can have a chat.